The morning I got the call, I was standing in a hotel lobby 3 states away. The bank manager's voice was calm, almost apologetic. "Mr. Lewis, the remaining balance on your account is $32.14. $32. 3 weeks earlier, that account held for $7 million, and I knew exactly who had taken it. It wasn't strangers. It wasn't hackers. It was my own blood. My name is Mark Lewis. I'm 43 years old, and last year I did something I never thought would happen to me. I won the state lottery. Enough money to wipe out every debt, by every dream I'd shelved for decades. I didn't tell many people, just my parents, my brother Paul, and my 2 sisters, Jenna and Claire. Felt wrong to hide it from them. After all, they were family. When I had to leave for a month-long work trip overseas, I made what I thought was a smart move. I set up a trust account for the winnings, locked tight in my name, but with a limited power of attorney for Paul so he could pay my bills while I was gone. I didn't know it then, but that piece of paper was the knife they'd used to gut me. By the time I flew home, they'd cashed out every cent. They'd forged my signature, shuffled the money through shell accounts, and vanished from my life without a single explanation. No calls, no texts, just silence. But here's the thing about me. I don't beg for what's mine. I take it back. And before this was over, every one of them would learn what it feels like to lose everything. Slowly, piece by piece, until the only place left to stand was under my roof, wearing my uniform, cleaning my floors. When you've been gutted like that, the first instinct is to burn everything down. That wasn't my instinct. I'd spent 20 years in logistics, building systems, tracking shipments, finding weak points. I knew how to dismantle something without making a sound. The first step was patience. I didn't call them. I didn't storm over to my parents' house or Paul's condo. I wanted them to believe I was beaten. People get careless when they think the fight's over. Instead, I started digging. Public records told me more than I expected. Jenna had used part of the money for a boutique clothing store in the city. Claire had bought a rental property outright. Paul had gone big. He and my parents had partnered with a local investor to buy into a chain of cleaning service franchises. That was the key. The cleaning business. On paper, it was smart. Low overhead, steady demand. But I knew the franchisor, a man named Victor Shaw. I'd helped him restructure his supply chain years ago, and he owed me a favor. I called Victor, kept it casual. Asked about the franchise Paul had bought. Victor laughed. "Your brother? Yeah, they paid top dollar for that territory. But between you and me, they don't know what they're doing. If someone wanted to nudge things along, I could make the buyback clause kick in early." We talked for an hour. By the end of it, Victor agreed to quietly flag their franchise for underperformance. No shutdown yet, just enough extra inspections, failed audits, and surprise expenses to put them on the back foot. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old friend in commercial real estate, the kind of guy who can make a profitable location suddenly lose its lease. We talked about Jenna's store. I wasn't in a rush, because I didn't just want them broke. I wanted them to walk into the same trap they'd built for me, and never see the door close until it locked behind them. The first rail crack appeared in Paul's cleaning franchise 2 months later. Victor kept his word. The random inspections started piling up. Every time they passed one, another would appear the next week. Stricter, pettier. The auditors flagged equipment for replacement, slapped fines on minor infractions, and lost paperwork that had to be resubmitted for a fee. Paul was stubborn, but I knew the numbers would bleed him out. Their buy-in had eaten most of their liquid cash, and they were relying on steady income to cover expenses. Choke the income and the rest follows. Jenna's boutique was easier. My real estate contact made one phone call to the landlord, hinting at a better-paying tenant waiting in the wings. Within weeks, she was hit with a rent increase she couldn't absorb. She posted on social media about greedy landlords and small business struggles. I watched quietly. Claire was still the hardest to reach. A rental property is stable, especially if it's paid off. But tenants can be convinced to leave when the right incentives appear, and vacancies cost money. I had a friend pose as a potential buyer offering above market value, contingent on the unit being empty. The tenants took the cash to move out. The deal never happened. Claire was left with an empty house, no rent, and a property tax bill. The beauty of it all was that they didn't know it was me. They thought it was bad luck, a rough market, maybe even their own mistakes. That ignorance kept them from banding together too soon. But the day was coming when I'd close the circle, when every path they tried to take would lead straight to me. And by then, they'd be too desperate to ask why the door was open. By month 4, the cracks in their new lives were visible from the street. Paul's cleaning franchise was barely limping along. The underperformance reports had triggered higher franchise fees and cut him out of priority contracts. He'd had to let 2 employees go. Jenna's boutique was running clearance sales to make rent. Claire had listed her rental property online, but weeks passed without a single bite. That was when I set the bait. Through a shell company, one with no visible link to me, I began quietly advertising a rapid acquisition program for struggling small businesses in the area. The pitch was simple. We take over the operations, keep the owners on payroll, and buy out your assets so you can breathe again. I knew exactly how it would land. For people who were desperate but too proud to admit it, it sounded like a lifeline. And it worked faster than I expected. Claire reached out first. The empty property was eating her alive, and the idea of a guaranteed payout had her hooked before she even asked the terms. Jenna followed within 2 weeks, her voice shaking on the phone as she talked about bad timing and needing a partner with more stability. Paul was last. Pride made him hesitate, but numbers don't lie. When Victor dropped his franchise renewal fees again, this time with a 30-day deadline, Paul called my shell company like a man clinging to the last rung of a ladder. They all signed. On paper, it looked like they were handing control to a faceless corporate buyer. In reality, every document, every account, every transfer was sliding into my hands. And I didn't even have to hide the terms. The assets would be absorbed into a larger enterprise, with operational reassignment for all existing staff. They didn't read the fine print. If they had, they'd have seen what was waiting for them in Section 9. Operational reassignment may include relocation and/or transfer to facilities outside the original scope of business. That's legal language for, we can put you anywhere we want. The contracts closed on a Thursday. By Monday morning, the reassignment letters went out. Claire was the first to call. There's been a mistake, she said, her voice sharp. They've assigned me to a cleaning crew in the downtown office complex. I don't even work in cleaning. That's what operational reassignment means, I told her. Not as myself, of course, but through the HR manager I'd hired to run the shell company's front. Jenna's letter placed her in retail maintenance, which sounded harmless until she realized it meant stocking shelves and scrubbing floors in one of the discount chains I'd acquired years ago. Paul's assignment stung the most. Night shift supervisor for a janitorial team. No clients to charm, no contracts to sign. Just mops, trash bags, and long silent hours. They all called the same number. They all got the same polite answer. Your positions are guaranteed, and your wages meet state requirements. Any changes must be approved by corporate. Corporate. Me. I made sure the wages were just high enough to keep them from quitting outright, but low enough to sting every time the bills came due. The best part? They still didn't know whose company they were working for. To them, it was just another faceless chain swallowing up smaller fish. I visited one of the office buildings a week later, under the guise of a corporate inspection. Paul didn't see me. He was too busy hauling trash bags down a service corridor. His shirt was damp with sweat, his eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity. I felt balance. And I wasn't finished yet. By the second month, the fight had left their voices. At first, they tried to resist. Claire called twice a week, threatening legal action over misrepresentation. Jenna sent long, emotional emails about her health, her unsuitable work environment, her belief that she'd been treated unfairly. Paul, predictably, tried to rally the others into breaking their contracts. None of it mattered. The agreements they'd signed were airtight. Every clause, every line had been vetted by my attorney with one goal in mind. No exits without my consent. And I wasn't giving it. When Claire went to an employment lawyer, she discovered the company had documented her performance issues in her first week. Fabricated, of course, but enough to undermine any claim she might make. Jenna's HR file contained written acknowledgments of her role and duties, with her signature at the bottom of each page. Paul, his franchise records had been quietly merged into the corporate portfolio, erasing his ownership entirely. They were trapped. I saw Paul once more, this time at a supply warehouse my company owned. He didn't see me. I stayed behind tinted glass as he loaded boxes into a van. He moved slower than I remembered, his shoulders bent under a weight far heavier than what he was carrying. That night, I pulled up the payroll system. The numbers were neat, clean, on time. They were making just enough to survive exactly as planned. I could have ended it there. Let them live out the rest of their lives on the bottom rung, working for a name they didn't recognize but that owned every hour of their day. But there was one last thing I wanted before I closed the book. I wanted them to know. I started with Claire. One rainy Thursday evening, I had her summoned to corporate headquarters for a routine employee review. She arrived 20 minutes early, clutching a folder of neatly printed timesheets and performance notes. She expected to see a mid-level HR manager. Instead, she walked into my office. Her face went pale. "Mark," I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she lowered herself into the seat like someone bracing for impact. "You've been working for me for 6 months," I said evenly. "Every mop you've pushed, every toilet you've scrubbed, it's all been under my roof." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Why?" was all she could manage. "Because you earned it," I said. "You all did." Her hands trembled. We needed the money." "No," I cut her off. "You wanted my money, and you thought you could take it without consequence. Now you know what consequence feels like." She left without another word. I knew she'd run straight to Jenna and Paul, but I also knew they'd think she was lying. They'd tell themselves it was just me playing a part in some corporate stunt. That was fine, because a week later it was Jenna's turn. I happened to be at the discount store during her shift, walking the aisles in a tailored suit while she stocked shelves in a faded uniform. I stopped in front of her, picked up a product from her section, and turned it over in my hands. "Looks like you're getting the hang of things," I said. She froze. "You?" "Me," I confirmed, smiling just enough to make it sting. "See you next week." By the time Paul figured it out, the fear had already taken root. And that was exactly where I wanted them before the final blow. Paul's turn came during the quarterly all-staff meeting. Every location sent a representative to the corporate training center, a shiny glass building they'd all driven past 100 times without knowing it was mine. Paul was there in his night shift uniform, sitting in the back row with a paper cup of burnt coffee. He didn't see me walk in. Not until I stepped onto the stage. The room went quiet. I let my eyes sweep over the crowd before landing on him. "Some of you may not know me," I began. "My name is Mark Lewis. I own this company. Every contract, every building, every uniform, mine." Paul's face drained of color. His cup tipped in his hand, coffee dripping onto his pants. "And some of you," I continued, "have been with us for less than a year. You came from businesses we acquired. You signed contracts thinking you were escaping hardship. But what you really did was come home." I let the silence hang, eyes locked on him. "Paul, stand up." He didn't move. "Stand." Slowly, he rose to his feet. The entire room turned toward him. "This man," I said, "is my brother. Last year, he and several others thought they could take what wasn't theirs. Every dollar, every cent of my lottery winnings, gone. They left me with nothing. Today, I signed their paychecks." A ripple went through the room. Paul's hands were fists at his sides, but he didn't speak. "You're here because you made a choice," I said. "Now you live with it." I stepped back, dismissed the meeting, and walked out without looking behind me. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with missed calls. Claire, Jenna, Paul. I didn't answer a single one. They wanted to talk. I wanted them to work. After that meeting, the calls stopped coming. Not because they'd given up, but because they'd run out of things to say. The silence was louder than any argument they could have made. Claire kept her head down at the office complex. She moved slower now, like every step was a reminder of what she'd lost. Jenna stopped wearing makeup to her shifts. Her social media accounts went dark. Paul looked older every time I saw him. The man who once strutted into every room like he owned it now avoided eye contact. His shoulders caved in. I checked their pay stubs once a month. No side gigs, no sudden windfalls, just the steady grind of hourly wages. They were surviving barely. Rent, groceries, gas. No vacations, no luxuries, no investments. Exactly the life they'd thought they were sparing themselves by stealing from me. One evening, I drove past the houses they'd bought with my money. All sold. New cars in the driveways, new names on the mailboxes. The profits were long gone, swallowed by debts and expenses they'd never been prepared to manage. They had nothing left to cash in, nothing left to sell, and they were still mine. I could have ended it there, kept them in my company until they retired or quit. But there was one more thing I wanted. Not for revenge, not for satisfaction. For closure. I wanted them to understand that every mop, every scrub, every paycheck had always come from me, and that it always would. So I set the stage for the final conversation. I called them in on a Friday. Not to HR, not to a conference room, to my office. All three of them together for the first time since the day they emptied my account. They walked in quietly. No one sat until I told them to. "Why are we here?" Paul asked, his voice low. I leaned back in my chair. "Because this is the last time we're going to speak about any of this." No one interrupted. "You took everything from me," I said. "Every cent of my lottery winnings. You forged my name, drained my account, and disappeared. You left me with nothing but the lesson that family doesn't always mean loyalty." Claire shifted in her chair. Jenna stared at the floor. "I could have gone to the police. You'd have served time. But instead, I decided to teach you the only lesson you'd understand: work for what you have. So I built the trap, you walked into it, and now you've spent nearly a year cleaning my floors, stocking my shelves, and running my errands." Paul's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. "This company will keep you employed as long as you want. Your wages will be fair. Your hours will be steady. But you'll never climb higher. You'll never own anything here. That part of your life is over." I stood. "You can quit any time. Walk out that door and never look back. Or you can stay and remember every day what it costs to betray me." They didn't answer. I didn't expect them to. When they left, I locked the door behind them. Not because I thought they'd come back, but because the chapter was finished. I'd built my closure. I'd kept my money and taken back more than they'd ever stolen. And now, when I see them pushing carts down the aisles or emptying trash cans in the buildings I own, I don't feel anger. I feel nothing at all, because they work for me, and they always will.